21. Zimbabwe. When I left Johannesburg, I went to Salisbury, the capital of Southern Rhodesia, where I had one of the strangest experiences of my life. I was introduced to a retired Royal Naval Commander, himself a diviner and who was spending most of his time in the famous Zimbabwe ruins searching with his rod for Aaron's golden calf, which he was convinced had been given by King Solomon to the Queen of Sheba and stored by her, with other treasure of fabulous value, in a secret treasure house at Zimbabwe. It is of course useless to argue with people who have become obsessed by the treasure-seeking mania, otherwise, I might have pointed out that the author of the strange tale in the Bible affirms that Moses ground the calf to powder and made the people drink it, before having some 3,000 of them murdered. The commander also believed that the Queen of Sheba had been buried at Zimbabwe and that the small, ruined buildings of similar construction, found in the bush between the ancient port of Sofala and Zimbabwe, marked the spots where her coffin had rested on the 250 miles journey from the coast. The origin and purpose of these mysterious ruins have been the subject of controversy for over 3/4 of a century, since they were discovered in 1868. It is generally believed that they date back to about 1200 BC, but some eminent authorities think that they were the work of Arab slaves or gold seekers in the Middle Ages. Having seen them, I find this hard to believe. One thing seems certain, and that is that they were not built by the native Bantu. The ruins at Zimbabwe fall into 3 groups: the Elliptical Temple, the Acropolis and the Valley of the Ruins. The temple is open to the sky and surrounded by a girdle wall of approximately 830 feet, which is overpowering in its massive strength. It is 16 feet thick and, at least 30 feet high, and is built of small granite blocks of identical size, which are estimated to weigh over 100,000 tons. Similar blocks, some tooled into a curve, were used to build a smaller inner wall and a huge conical tower, 40 feet high, which is solid right through and is believed to have been used for some form of religious ceremony, possibly phallic, as numerous phallic emblems have been found in the valley ruins. It has been suggested that the voodoo religion with all its horrors was performed there also. On the top of the girdle wall is a beautifully cut double chevron pattern which adds greatly to its magnificence. The stones in the walls and buildings were all laid without mortar or cement and must have been shaped at the quarries from which the granite was extracted, for, although their numbers must run into millions, no great quantity of chips and splinters have ever been found. As there is no indication of a quarry near Zimbabwe, it is probable that the stones were carried an incredible distance by human labor. It is also strange that, although thousands of people must have been employed for many years in erecting these stupendous buildings, no burial ground and no inscriptions have, thus far, been discovered. During the 1890s, much damage was done to the buildings by treasure hunters who are said to have made away with at least 1,000 ounces of gold ornaments, but, beyond some oriental glazed ware of the 13th to 15th century, relics of some barbarous people who must have occupied the ruins in comparatively recent centuries, nothing has ever been discovered which throws any light on the origin and purpose of these mysterious buildings. The early Portuguese explorers found Arab ships at Sofala laden with gold, and Arab authorities have connected the ruins with ancient gold workings, so it has been suggested that they were the Ophir of King Solomon and inspired Rider Haggard with a background for King Solomon's mines and others of his fascinating books. But nothing is really known. The temple was, almost certainly, used for religious purposes with phallic rites, and the Acropolis was a military stronghold. Beyond that, everything is conjecture. The ruins stand, awe-inspiring and inscrutable. Cracks are gaping in the walls and towers, heaps of stones litter the ground, forecasting that at no very distant date the dead city will sink to the ground and be buried once again beneath the tropic forest. My naval friend had been divining among the valley ruins for many years. They lie between the temple and the Acropolis, which was built on a hill about 1/4 mile away. The commander was looking for underground passages and hidden treasure. He had an idea that the temple and Acropolis were connected by tunnels, and had several likely spots lined up for me to test, which I confirmed. I also found several more, one of which was very large and seemed to pass through a great cavern cut around the edge in the form of a Greek key pattern, measuring several feet in width. After much work, I found a labyrinth of passages leading off this cavern, which in the absence of any other burial place, suggested to me that they and the cavern itself might have been used as catacombs. As the whole area was composed of solid granite, what became of the stone taken out when the cavern and passages were excavated? The chippings could certainly not have been used for building purposes above ground. Another strange thing was the total absence of any means of ventilation. Between the girdle wall and the inner wall of the temple is a narrow passage, just wide enough for one man to pass through. It leads to the place where the priests must have performed their unhallowed rites amid crowds of terrified worshippers, all wondering whether their turn had come to figure on the sacrificial stone. It was there that I next started to work. The commander was convinced that the golden calf would have been hidden in the most sacred spot in the building, the sacrificial altar. It was a beautiful sunny day, and streams of natives, who take a great interest in the ruins, kept passing by. There were also a large number of white visitors who stopped to watch me at my work. Everything seemed quite safe and normal. I was getting strong reactions for gold and kept drawing a large figure 8 10 to 12 feet in length on the ground, with a smaller elongated top circle and a larger round one below. The lower circle had a V-shaped incision, rather like the frog in a horse's hoof. The commander was quite close to me, and a benevolent old gentleman was watching me with absorbed interest, when something happened. What it was I do not know. All I know is that I was suddenly enveloped in a dark, slimy cloud which seemed to ooze out of the ground from the big circle of the 8 and reeked of death and decay. I was so horror-stricken I could not move. I had often heard people talk of their hair standing on end with fright and thought it a mere figure of speech, but my hair certainly did on that occasion. I could feel it stiffen and rise, and I was sick with terror. Intangible forms seemed to issue from the 8 and clutched at me with horrible hands, as if to claw out my heart. I must have given a piercing shriek, for the commander rushed to me and dragged me out of the sacred enclosure. He was nearly as terrified as I was and told me, afterwards, that it was a horrible shock to him to see the dreadful panic in my eyes and feel the corpse-like clamminess of my hands. I never went near that spot again and was very thankful to see the last of the Zimbabwe ruins. I have not been the only white person to experience the power and horror of the malignant force lurking in the ruins. There was a mine manager's wife in Salisbury who had the gift of healing and was doing remarkable work in the town. She had come from the Highlands of Scotland and was the daughter of a gillie. I can only describe her as a saint. She, with her husband and another mine manager and his wife, was standing in the sacred enclosure near where I had my own horrifying experience. There were numbers of trippers and natives about, as in my own case, and her husband and friends were close to her. Suddenly she was lifted from the ground, conveyed several yards through the air and then thrown violently to the ground in full view of the people there. The party fled from the sanctuary but, strange to say, the 2 mine managers were sufficiently undisturbed to visit a celebrated hill in the neighborhood. The hill could only be climbed from one side, which was very steep, but 20 or 30 yards over the top it ended in a cliff with a sheer drop of hundreds of feet. It was the place where a native tribe had disposed of their defeated opponents in battle by marching them over the abyss. The 2 men had reached the top and were admiring the magnificent view when they were forcibly propelled from behind and pushed towards the edge of the cliff. It was only by throwing themselves on the ground and clutching at the scanty vegetation that they were saved from being hurled into space. They then scrambled back over the top on all fours and fled from the accursed spot. After I left Salisbury, the commander obtained permission to make excavations to explore the cavern and passages which we had found, a permission that was almost immediately withdrawn however, because World War II broke out and he was recalled to the services. So far as I know, no further attempts have been made, and the mystery of the Zimbabwe ruins is still unsolved and may well remain so until the end of time. End of Part 21.